into this mix.
Hey friends, this is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network, and today we are going to continue our ongoing series looking into historical anarchists, getting to know them a little bit better. Before we do that, I'd like to recommend that you guys bookmark theconsciousresistance.com to learn more about our website, find our interviews, essays, articles, vlogs, news reports. You can also download my books. If you want to hear my views on anarchism, you can download them for free there. You can support us by buying shirts. Also recommend you subscribing to our email newsletter. And if you want to support our partners, My Brave Botanicals, you can get a free ounce of kratom and check out some of their CBD as well. All right, so in the past, I've done this series, Who is Valterine de Cleyre? Who is Benjamin Tucker? Who is Lysander Spooner? Who is Josiah Warren? And it all started with who is Samuel E. Conklin III and what is agorism? Of course, you can find this on our YouTube channel on our Anarchist series. There are 5 videos in it currently. This will be the 6th, and I have at least 2 more anarchists that I'd like to do. I want to do Malatesta and then also Nestor Makhno, who are not necessarily individualist anarchists. I would say Malatesta is, and they're different than the previous anarchists I've covered, but I consider them to be anarchists, and so we are still going to follow their stories. But today we're going to look at Gertrude B. Kelly, who is, I would say, a lesser known anarchist, individualist, feminist, who her memory hasn't survived as well as some others, we could say. But today we're going to try to change that by giving you some background on who Gertrude Bride Kelly was, what her philosophy was, why she was important, and how she stands out. And then also at the end of this video, I'm going to show you a little clip I took when I went to visit a memorial to Gertrude B. Kelly. So stay tuned for that. Dr. Gertrude B. Kelly was a surgeon, a philanthropist, and a suffragette. She was born on February 10th, 1862, and then she died February 24th, 1934. She was outspoken not only in support of Irish independence throughout her life, but also individualist anarchism, and then workers' causes, feminist movements, non-state feminism, and then eventually community involvement, building community clinics as a doctor towards the end of her life. We're going to go through the different parts of her life, get to know a little bit of her background, hear about her views on workers' rights. We're going to hear about her views on anarchism and her fight for Irish independence, and a few other areas that I think are of importance to note about Gertrude B. Kelly. Gertrude B. Kelly was born Brigid Kelly on February 10th, 1862 in Ireland to her parents Jeremiah Kelly and Kate Forrest Kelly. She was known as Bride to her friends. She came to the United States in 1868, settling in Hoboken, New Jersey. Her father went back into teaching in the public school system, becoming a principal of New Jersey School in 1872. So both her parents were teachers in Ireland and continued to teach once they came to America. In Jersey, both of her parents were active in the Land League. Her father was the president of the Jersey City branch of the Land League, so showing some early involvement in activism in her family. After she graduated from high school, Kelly studied medicine in the Women's Medical College of New York Infirmary for Women and Children, graduating in 1884, and went on to practice as a doctor. Despite being in America, Kelly remained interested in the situation in Ireland, and her work in the tenements gave her insight into the lives of the poor. So we'll get more into that in a moment. Let's focus for a second on her earlier work, which her earliest work tended towards, I would say, involvement in the anarchist movement, and of course she got involved in workers' rights. So we'll start with her anarchist work. She was an individualist anarchist, and in the 1880s especially, and she published frequent articles in various periodicals, namely Benjamin Tucker's Liberty, and we've done previous episode on Benjamin Tucker. His Liberty journal was one of the most well-known of the time, discussing individualist anarchism in the United States. She also wrote for the Irish World. She was the foremost female contributor to Liberty, and she was hugely praised by Benjamin Tucker, who was the editor, of course. She was also a member of the Ladies' Land League in America, and she believed in the No Rent Manifesto published by the Irish National Land League in 1881. She was a supporter of freedom for other nations. She was a member of the Friends of Freedom for India and Friends of New Russia. So she supported revolutionary causes to fighting colonialist powers in the 1880s. Her main local causes were in support of women and poor families. She founded a medical clinic in Chelsea, as well as being on the surgical staff at the New York Infirmary for Women and Children for over 30 years. And she wrote numerous papers on surgical and medical procedures and on social health issues. So she talked a lot about not only her beliefs in individualist anarchism, which she published in Liberty, but also her beliefs economically and her beliefs in fighting for independence of all nations. And it's interesting because as a doctor, we're going to show it in a moment, she also wrote about her views on doctors and hospitals taking aid from the government, from the state. So she was writing as an anarchist and as a doctor. So it's really interesting. She was opposed to what was known and what has been known historically as capitalism, which she considered to be, state capitalism, the people, business owners coming together and using the state to gain advantage over the marketplace. She believed that this is what she referred to as capitalism was the cause for poverty that she saw in the world. She also spoke against practices of teaching women embroidery and art rather than making them self-sufficient. So she saw that, the way that the culture of the time was treating women was more to keep them busy or to give them certain skills. Not to say that art isn't important, but they weren't allowing them into certain areas of the world that would allow them to develop as individuals and become self-sufficient and sovereign and not to need a man. She saw herself as an anarchist in the beginning, but in her later years, she started to identify herself as a socialist. In her writings, she made statements which were very rare for a feminist of her time. She, at one point, made the point saying, quote, "There is, properly speaking, no women question apart from the question of human rights and human liberty." And this was in response to the idea of what to do about the women question. Like, are women actually equal to men and should they be considered such? And she was just saying there's no difference between a woman and a man or any other human being. The fight for human rights and human liberty is all the same. Now, as she moved towards her feminism, now I know there's some who, thinking in terms of today's modern feminism, reject feminism. But what I appreciate about her is that she believed in fighting for equal rights for women, but also she didn't want to use the state to do it. And she also tried to fight cultural stereotypes. She believed that women had been oppressed by these cultural stereotypes, which had been created at the time primarily by men. She wrote, quote, "Men have always denied to women the opportunity to think, and if some women have had courage enough to dare public opinion and insist upon thinking for themselves, they have been so beaten that most powerful women in society's arsenal ridicule, that is, have effectively prevented the great majority from making any attempt to come out of slavery." So she's saying that it's a societal thing and women even attacking each other. She waged this charge equally at the supposedly enlightened men, even in her own political circles and her own anarchist circles, whom she claimed, quote, would immediately change not only the serious topics of conversation, but change the very tones of their voice when their wives or sisters entered the room. She did believe in the labor theory of value, similarly to individualist Josiah Warren, who often expressed his view as the cost is the limit of price. And she, again, shared the radical belief at the time that capitalism was an alliance between the government and business, in which the government guaranteed legal privileges to the rich. And so, in essence, she considered all forms of capitalism to be what most contemporary modern individualists would call state capitalism. She was inspired by English liberals, classical liberals, Herbert Spencer and John Stuart Mill, who she often quoted in her articles. And her articles showed a pretty good range of breadth of reading. For one, that she had read Proudhon, she'd read Godwin and Malthus and others, so she displayed an intelligence and she was well read. So it was really awesome. I definitely recommend reading any of her stuff, and I'm going to put the links below to a search that'll show you all of her different writings that you can check out. And she also advised fellow individualists who wanted to pursue various reforms to ease the immediate problems of female labor. She advised them to educate themselves by listening to the voices of working women. So that was another really cool thing. You can find essays of her saying, look, instead of trying to reform the government, go actually listen to the females and the women and the workers and talk to them and hear what their concerns are and what their issues are instead of, believing that just reforming the state is going to fix things. And again, as far as her anarchist views, one major point I think that should be made is that she was alive around the time of what has become known as the Haymarket Affair, the Haymarket Incident, which was after a bombing took place at a labor protest rally on May 4th, 1886 at Haymarket Square in Chicago. And this rally, of course, was peaceful at first. Eventually, it turned into, bombs being thrown, and several workers were killed by the police in that time. And so there was a big protest. There was controversy where there was a bomb thrown, and anarchists were put to death. Activists that were alive at that point were, and the whole thing was BS. I think most people can understand and realize that it was BS. But in response to this, people were ready to rage and try to overthrow the government or just riot more in the streets. And some of the anarchists were saying, hey, we can't support violence. And so if somebody threw a bomb, like in the journal Liberty was a big debate of should we support the Haymarket anarchists, because the individualist versus the collectivist communist anarchist, they didn't always agree on everything. And one of those things they disagreed on often was the tactic of whether or not violence is acceptable in pursuit of fighting the state. So some in individualist circles rejected supporting the Haymarket anarchists and just said, well, they use violence and this is what the state's going to do. Others were more sympathetic. Gertrude B. Kelly, she preached principled consistency and nonviolence. And there's an essay from her that is called A Time to Beware of Passion. And I want to give you a quote from this because I think it is important. If ever there was a time in which the true friends of the revolution were especially called upon to keep their reason unclouded and to possess their souls in patience, that time is now. Now, when the whole force of the press is directed against the men under sentence of death in Chicago. Now, when every impulse of common human sympathy tends to make us rage ourselves at their side. But let not the sympathy which we feel with them in their unjust sentence make us forget for a moment that however honest and devoted these men were, however pure their motives, the methods by which they sought to attain their ends are not those by which the social revolution can ever really be accomplished. So she's talking about violence. Oh, my brothers, let no blind feelings of revenge against the state and its tools lead you to play into its hands by attempting to meet force with force. Remember that the use of force must always react with most deadly effect upon us. Remember that an economic revolution can never be accomplished by force. Remember that the employment of force leads to the redevelopment of the military spirit, which is totally opposed to the spirit that must exist in the people before anything we wish for can be brought about. Remember that the government is really enforced not by the bayonets which it is surrounded, but by the ignorance in the minds of the people. And it is this ignorance and this alone that we are called upon to combat. And it is only as this is destroyed that success is possible. Remember that every appeal to brute force tends to retard the dissipation of the ignorance. So I could go on. The whole essay is really amazing and worth reading. A Time to Be Aware of Passion. But you get the point as she's telling people to exercise caution, to not give into this feeling, despite having watched some of their friends, anarchists, be killed. I believe they were hung as a result of this and found guilty of violence. She said, to exercise caution and that the economic revolution can never be accomplished by force. So really good stuff, I would say. Now, she was also involved in some worker rights movements. She was one of the organizers of the American Women Pickets for Enforcement of America's War Aims, which protested at the British Embassy in Washington in 1920. They also organized a strike at Chelsea Piers, which lasted 3.5 weeks, in protest of the British Prime Minister's actions in relation to ongoing conflicts in Ireland. The strike spread to Brooklyn, New Jersey, and Boston and included Irish, Italian, and African American workers. And the strike at Chelsea's Pier was termed, quote, the first purely political strike of working men in the history of the United States by the New York Sun. She was also a pacifist who believed, obviously, in nonviolent protest, and she had been arrested several times at anti-war demonstrations during World War I. So I just think it's really awesome to see that this person that I personally feel aligned with, more than 100 years ago, is out there fighting for the rights of individuals, of entrepreneurs, of workers. She's spreading an individualist, anarchist message. She's spreading an empowering feminist message, not a victimized message. She's also preaching nonviolence and recognizing that that violence isn't going, like meeting the state with violence or trying to overthrow things violently isn't going to lead to a true evolution or a revolution. And as I mentioned, she grew up with teachers. Her parents were teachers. She was a doctor herself, and so education was very important to her. She said that in her one of her essays, which is called "State Aid to Science," she said that basically she's saying that if you start taking support from the state, from the government, then it's going to lead to them either controlling your research or to dictating which directions it goes. And that progress in science is lessened, if not ultimately destroyed, by state interference, and that even if the state aid, the money from the state, does somehow promote progress in science, that promotion would be too great in expense of the best interests of the race towards better science. She said that the impossibility of governments promoting knowledge by pointing out that a subsidy is, quote, not and cannot be an aid to science, but to particular doctrines or dogmas, and that where there is aid is given, it requires almost a revolution to introduce a new idea. So again, she's saying that the state can get control of science by starting to fund it. And she said that an arrangement like this would, quote, be a great many big idle queens at the expense of the workers. So she has an interesting way of saying things. Obviously, she's speaking from the 1880s and the early 1900s, but it's really interesting because she recognized that the state shouldn't be involved in this way. And she was also really cool, opposed to government attempts to license physicians or regulate medicine because government could not guarantee the safety or quality of medical care. She believed it could only create a quasi-union of medical elites and block progress. So really, really awesome. And in that essay there, A State Aid to Science, she said, I maintain that you have no right to decide what is happiness or knowledge for him, any more than you have to decide what religion he must give adherence to. You have no right to take away a single cent of his property without his consent. Woe to the nation that would strive to increase knowledge or happiness at the expense of justice. It will end by not having morality or happiness or knowledge. And of course, she is saying that because they're taking money from taxes, which is theft, and then using that to fund science. So even if there are benefits, she said that it devalues it, and that if ordinary people sufficiently valued a service being funded by the state, then tax funding wouldn't be necessary. And if they don't value it, then the government has no right to take the money from the worker to make it happen. So really cool. Again, against government licensing of physicians and regulation of medicine because she was against the state and believing that state funding of science can only lead to them controlling it. And interestingly enough, towards her break from anarchism, like I said, she started to identify more as a socialist, and she was really into her clinics that she was involved in New York and helping the poor who needed medical care. And I think for her, she started to see this more as a way that socialism was a way to get medicine for everybody who needed it, and that being an individualist anarchist wasn't helping her get to that goal. But I do know that one major thing that caused her to split from the individualist anarchist movement was the debate that happened not only in Benjamin Tucker's Liberty Journal, but within the individualist anarchist movement in America at the time, where there was a split where some people started to say that the reason they were anarchist individualists was because of their belief in natural law, and others who became Stirnerites from Max Stirner's egoism and started to believe in his philosophy. And actually, this debate is what eventually caused her to leave the journal Liberty, because Benjamin Tucker and others became egoists for a very brief period of time. And there was a debate among this, an argument between natural law and the egoism of Max Stirner. So she left there eventually, and she started to contribute to a journal that was called Nemesis, that was very brief, and then she began writing for the periodical called The Alarm under the editorship of Dyer Lum, who is another interesting anarchist radical. And so she left Liberty and stopped working with Benjamin Tucker and most of that crowd. And again, as an anarchist and as somebody who doesn't wait around and doesn't want the government to do things, she started to take action into her own hands. So she expressed her principles through action, and she became the director of a clinic that was explicitly for the poor in the Chelsea district of New York City. And as an outlet for writing and theory, she turned to the cause of women's suffrage and Irish independence. So she continued to fight for women's rights and continued to fight for Irish independence, and she was a prominent member of the Irish Women's Council. And eventually she died in 1934 while still in New York City and, again, still serving the poor through her clinic. 2 years after her death in 1934, New York City Mayor Fiorella LaGuardia dedicated a park called the Dr. Gertrude B. Kelly Playground on 21st Street in New York City that you can go visit and see. And I actually did that. So check this clip out, and thank you guys for learning about Dr. Gertrude B. Kelly. So I'm here in New York City, in Chelsea, at Dr. Gertrude B. Kelly Playground. So this one-time anarchist, radical activist for Irish rights, for women's rights, for anti-statism. She created free clinics here in the city. She helped out all kinds of people, and they named a park after her. And it's kind of just a big cement slab, as you can see. There's kids playing, there's basketball, there's tennis. It's an active area. It's part of the neighborhood. I don't know how many people actually know who she is or the history of her, but it's pretty cool. And I just wanted to come here to sort of soak in her spirit, I guess you could say, and show my appreciation and thanks. And maybe we all can hope that we leave behind a legacy of work and philosophy and inspiration that at the very least, maybe one day we'll get a park named after us. So I'm going to soak this in.